grieving. Some families will be lost to one another forever. To those of you who face the difficulties of reconnecting with family and establishing ongoing relationships, we say sorry. We offer this apology in the hope that it will assist your healing and in order to shine a light on a dark period of our nation's history. To those who have fought for the truth to be heard, we hear you now.
You're listening to Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption. I'm one of your hosts, Jo Sparrow. This podcast is a production of Jigsaw Queensland Post-Adoption Support Service. However, the views expressed are those of the people participating, not necessarily Jigsaw Queensland. The podcast discusses adult themes and listener discretion is advised. Over the next 2 episodes, we'll be talking adoption, loss, and grief. Next week, Jane and I will discuss how the adoption experience, as well as many other factors, influence how we grieve losses that arise throughout our lives. This discussion will be based on Jane's experiences as a practitioner in the field of adoption and relevant research and theory. First, though, a personal story. Today we're joined by Lois, who has courageously agreed to have a conversation with me about a loss we have recently shared, the death of our adoptive parents. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lois, and my deepest condolences for the loss of your beautiful mum last year and your dad in 2017.
Hey, and to you too, Jo. I know that you loved your dad deeply as well.
I did, yeah. It's been a rough trot for us.
Yeah, on a bit of a roll.
Yeah.
My parents were mid-40s when they adopted me. So they were more a grandparent age, and I never imagined, honestly, that they would make it to their 90s. My mother in particular went on such a journey with me over my life, and I even referenced it at her funeral, but I'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah. Lois, you and I have many areas where our adoption experiences are similar.
Sure do.
Like you, I also had older adoptive parents. I think my dad was over 40 and my mum was probably 38, so they're a little bit older.
Yep.
And we're adopted into families that already had existing biological children.
Yep.
Could you tell us a bit about your story of adoption?
Yeah, well, first of all, we both are youngest children in our adoptive families. Go us. Yeah. So I've no memory of being told I was adopted. Mum said she started using the word adoption around me from a really young age. So she kind of frameworked it into this lovely story, which honestly was years ahead of what was probably normal. Well, what adoptive parents were, kind of the information they were or weren't given.
Yeah.
She'd tell me that a lovely girl had given birth to me, but for reasons we didn't understand, she couldn't take care of me, so I had to go to another family. And then she'd give me this story about packing my dad and brothers into the car and driving up to Nambour. She'd talk about the matron asking my brothers if they wanted to keep me. And my eldest brother, just a little boy, was kind of curious and said, will she cry a lot? And the matron said, well, no more than you did when you were a little baby. And my other brother just was quiet and shy and just grinned and nodded his head a whole lot. And then on the way home, my mum always said it was really cold. It was winter. It was, July. And they stopped into a cafe in Caboolture, and the waitress saw this newborn baby and was like, oh, this is obviously a lovely new baby. What's the baby's name? And the adoption happened so quick, my parents and my brothers all just looked at each other like they had done a dash and grab out of the hospital. They hadn't discussed my name, and my mother just looked at the waitress and was like, Lois? So it was kind of, she did have the name in mind, but she hadn't discussed it with anyone. So anyway.
Lois it was from then?
Yeah, it was Lois, and everyone's like, okay, no, you're the female of the house. My brothers and my dad didn't object. So anyway, look, I had a good childhood. Adoption was kind of my thing. I quickly found out who the other adoptees were in the classes and at church and groups that I were involved in, because you and I, Jo, were both born in an era where adoptions peaked in Queensland.
Yeah.
So anyway, I found out there are other adoptees, and most of the adults around me were fairly sensitive. My dad was a primary school teacher, and when I was in grade 2, the deputy, and he was one of those deputies that every kid in the school loved and adored, he told me that his daughter Anne was fostered. And so, you know, I quickly learnt the difference between fostered and adoption, particularly when Anne left the school a couple of years later, and it was because she wasn't part of that adopted family. And that deputy used to always look out for me, and I remember being sick, and he just completely fathered probably. Sorry, Mr. Swift, if you're still out there. I suspect you're not. He was an elderly gentleman too, but so kind. So I always had a very, I was lucky in the sense that I had a very positive outlook on adoption, and also by those around me. Mm-hmm. That's not to say I wasn't curious. I really, really wanted to look like somebody else. I'm going to say that confidence didn't last through high school. I heard someone referring to someone else in another grade who was adopted as being a loser because they were adopted, so I told no one. And my friends in high school were not part of that same group of friends that were a big part of, for me growing up, Girls Brigade church community. It was easy to separate people that knew about that and people that didn't. And quite frankly, I just, you know, chucked it somewhere where I just didn't want to talk about adoption anymore. I was kind of like, no. So I didn't talk about it from the ages of 13 to 16 or so. And then as I got to my 16th birthday, I became aware of girls at school that hadn't come back to year 11 or dropped out in year 11 because they were pregnant. Oh, wow. Because this is still the 80s, and so there's less of a debate about adoption and abortion. It's still complicated times in Australia, I think.
Yeah.
So girls were having their babies, and which is good. There was the supporting parents benefit out there.
There's still a stigma, wasn't there?
Oh, completely. Yeah. I'm going to say abortion was definitely not okay. And this isn't, you know, as adoptees, this isn't even an adoption-abortion debate. But anyway, I guess more so what I'm trying to say is by having this scenario happen around me, it perhaps triggered this light bulb moment that dawned on me that my biological mother was probably young and in high school. So I asked my mother, actually, do you think possibly she was young and in high school? And then at 16, my adoptive mother then gave me the actual letter that had come from the government when I was born, which confirmed she was young. And it was, you know, by now it was age appropriate that my mother gave me that letter. It showed that Rhonda, that's my birth mother, was 15 through most of her pregnancy and 16 when she gave birth. And you know, by the late 80s, there was so much talk in the newspaper that laws were going to change. And I was like, that's interesting. So I was approaching 23, and the laws, as you know, because you're an adult age then, right, Jo? You were 19?
Yeah, I was 19 in 1991 when that changed, yeah.
So the laws suddenly change, and you're confronted with, what are you going to do? And having lots of adopted friends, all of us were like, are you going to, you know, we're ringing each other, like, what are you going to do? And we all were totally going to look, you know, apply. Why wouldn't you? You're young and you're curious.
So you still had adopted friends at that stage?
Oh, yeah.
Really, I never had one.
Yeah.
Ever. Yeah.
I don't know. I just always seemed to know who they were, you know. I probably had 3 or 4, actually. My mum had been searching the regular family tree, as in my adoptive mum, and she really listened and understood when I said words to the effect of, I love my family, but your family tree really means nothing to me. She didn't take offence. She absolutely listened. And I remember she told her niece, and they were both like, oh, that's interesting, and that actually makes sense. So I actually didn't get any judgment for that. Anyway, I decided, okay, all right, well, I'm going to apply to meet my birth mother. And I remember my parents sitting on their bed, and I wandered into their bedroom one night, and I said, I think I'm going to apply to meet my birth mother. You know what? And they thought it was a good idea. maybe they were a bit apprehensive, maybe a bit more worried that she wouldn't want to meet me, but they absolutely supported that was, that's probably a good thing to do.
Yeah.
So I applied, I got Rhonda's info. Her parents hadn't moved house. It was so easy to get in contact. And we entered into a reunion that was to last 8 years, pretty much my 20s, from the ages of 23 to 31. When I was 31, she died quite young from cancer. So those 8 years were quite crucial in giving me an opportunity. I mean, I didn't recognise it at the time, but I was able to get information, create good and probably sad memories as well. But more than anything, I got a really good dose of mirroring during that time.
Yeah.
And that's really been crucial to how I've looked back on this years later. I mean, on a really simple level, we looked alike, we laughed alike. Both of us couldn't cook. Both of us maxed out our credit cards. We had I don't know. In many ways, as I said, it was a bit superficial. That's okay. She was so much fun because she was young, and I loved that out in public people would think, would naturally assume we were related because we looked so much alike. I mean, so there I am, I'm 23 and she's 39.
Yeah.
A 39-year-old birth mother. That blows my mind that we were both so young to be going through this with no, government support or suggestions other than the No More Secrets booklet from the Queensland government. Good luck with that. Okay, so this is the thing. I could see she disguised trauma and pain behind this really sunny disposition, there were certain things she wouldn't discuss with me, but she would kind of dismiss it in such a fun way. You just accept it. When I say she would dismiss it, I could tell pretty early on that she had issues with alcohol. Functioning alcoholic for sure, but still, enough to go, that's interesting. I mean, I grew up in a teetotaling family, and all of a sudden I've got a birth mother that drinks a bottle of wine every night, every night, sometimes more. Any time I spent with her always involved alcohol.
Yeah.
And I think it might have just been, there's a lot of things which I'll probably get into in a little bit. But anyway, she had a lot that she was trying to hide from me. She didn't want me to have to, and in an acceptable way. When I say hide, I mean she had childhood secrets that she just didn't want to traumatize me with. So meanwhile, my adoptive mother was older than Rhonda's mother. So in other words, my adoptive mother was older than my biological grandmother.
Wow.
So for my mother, it was pretty simple to not see Rhonda as a competitor. And my mum just mothered Rhonda as well. I mean, some of the things that make me laugh now and seem so surreal, like Rhonda staying over at the family home and sleeping in my bed while I'm on the floor in a sleeping bag having a slumber party, and Mum coming in on a Sunday morning with freshly squeezed orange juice and asking us if we would please like to come to church with her. And Rhonda and I were both like, yep, okay, that'll make Mum happy, let's do it. We were more like sisters at that point, but we're happy to go to church with her. And then going to church and having people staring and wondering if my adoptive mother had a secret daughter they didn't know about. Yeah. So it was the Sunday that my mother created scandal at church. And it's so priceless to look back at. I mean, we all laughed. It wasn't, Rhonda loved it. My mum thought it was fun too. It was just, I look back now and I can see Rhonda was probably, I was embarrassed that my mother was so much older, but Rhonda, I think, really probably appreciated the fact that I grew up in such a wholesome, old-fashioned Christian kind of home.
Yeah.
I think that really made her feel like, well, thank goodness, Lois is somewhere safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking the fact that you only had 8 years with Rhonda, how lucky it was that you searched at that time, because if you'd waited, which like many people wait, you could have missed out on that opportunity to meet her.
I just can't even imagine.
Yeah.
That, if I had waited, I think I would have had so many regrets,
Yeah.
and I also wouldn't have the context that I have now. I mean, it's possible if I'd waited, I still would have found out about the horrors of her childhood.
Yeah.
But instead, I can put in context this beautiful, lively soul that, like, I'm really proud to be from Rhonda. Take away all the aspects of Rhonda that made her life difficult. And she was such a kind, funny... I see the things about myself I like in Rhonda.
Yeah.
I mean, I love in Rhonda, and I see things as well, like, okay, that's a lesson, Lois. You know, got to work on those active listening skills. Rhonda and I found it, when we get talking on the phone, you know, it was a competition to, like, it was constant interruption, you know, like, and I grew up in a really introverted household, and it was hard at times growing up. I knew my family loved me, but we'd sit there on a Sunday having Sunday lunch, and my parents and my brothers would, like, look at each other like, when's someone going to turn off Lois's off button? Yeah. Like, wow. You know, like, she can pack so many words into a sentence, can't she? No, I felt loved, but I did feel that pressure of, you know, like, an extrovert in a severely introverted family.
Yeah.
Then, of course, when I did get to know my biological family, Rhonda was the eldest of 6 siblings, and her family was so, like, everybody talking over everybody else, and I'm like, wow, I really need some introverted time. Yeah. Like, that was an insight into the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
And,
I really understand what you were saying, because my family, you know, I had 3 biological siblings, or my parents had 3 biological children before I came along. So I always felt like they were a fabric, and that I could, you know, ride along on the fabric, but I couldn't penetrate it, because there was just things they seemed to get about each other. I don't even really know how to describe it, but there was something about them that I felt outside of, and it wasn't something they put on me. It was just something I felt. So,
yes, that's a good way of describing it.
Yeah. So, Lois, your mum was well known and deeply admired by us here at Jigsaw because of her unconditional love and support of you, and her willingness and desire to understand adoption issues. How did your relationship with your adoptive parents evolve and change during and after your reunion with Rhonda?
Okay, I got to say that I can't say I'm any different to any teenager, in that I didn't like my parents very much when I was a teenager. They were in their early 60s when I graduated high school.
Yeah.
And I was in my teens and just hit my 20s when I had my reunion. So I was only growing out of that phase where you don't want to be around your parents or listen to anything they have to say. The reunion happened probably at a crucial point anyway, in terms of me just becoming an adult. So it's interesting. So suddenly, as I'm going through this deeply emotional process of meeting my birth mother, I suddenly found myself really having to lean on my parents. And really, I probably drew on their reserves a little bit, because I could be quite emotional about, you know, I'd be happy or I'd be sad or I'd be angry, or just, you know, like whenever you go through reunion, you're thinking and overthinking every single little thing that happens. And, you know, in hindsight, maybe a counsellor in these days, probably someone would say, speak to a counsellor or go get some peer support. But anyway, it doesn't really matter, because I had these parents that were incredible. My mum was a ferocious reader and just demolished the same adoption materials that I did. It goes to show too, at 90-something, she came to the National Anniversary Apology event because she recognised girls like Rhonda had been totally let down by the government, by doctors, by society. And actually an interesting story that kind of shows the kind of person she was. A few years before I was born, my mum was quite sick for a while. It's the days when hysterectomies left you sort of incapacitated for months at a time. And my mum, marrying a bit later, she married at probably 37, 38, had 2 toddler sons she was trying to raise. So she sees in the church notices a family from Toowoomba trying to relocate their daughter for a few months down to Brisbane, and Mum knew instinctively what that meant. So she put, she allowed this lovely, I forget the girl's name, but the girl came and stayed with my parents for the duration of her pregnancy. Mum had no shame or worry what the neighbours would think. She let her stay with them. It's probably already a pretty gutsy move. Christmas Day comes along, or maybe just before Christmas, and her mother-in-law is, positively scandalised that that this girl is in the house. And my mum's mother-in-law states that, she really doesn't think it's appropriate, and she won't come to Christmas Day unless the girl is sent packing. At which point my mother, wishes her mother-in-law a Merry Christmas and I'll see you in the new year. So, anyway, boom. Talk about uninviting the mother-in-law to Christmas lunch. That's my mother. I really feel like my mother was ahead of her time. I had to constantly remind myself as the decades went by that this woman who I always thought was a bit old-fashioned was in fact really on top of social justice and fairness and righting wrongs. I was 43 when I found out retrospectively that my birth mother had in fact died with the most horrifying secrets of her childhood. I found out in so much detail that Rhonda had suffered, a lot of sexual abuse in the family home. And it was my mother, adoptive mother, that, hugged me and helped me process things initially. And it wasn't easy. I presented as an adult the weekend after I found this information completely and utterly falling apart. We both cried and cried and cried. Probably, a lot of reasons, but also the realisation from both of us that Rhonda had put on such a mask and hadn't wanted to traumatise me when she was alive, and also wanted to probably do that for my mother's sake as well. Rhonda only ever said such lovely things to my mother, that clearly really, really looked up to my mother. And, when you can look back and know that someone held a secret and why they held that secret, sometimes a secret can come out of a place of love. And I don't think I truly understood that message. Nothing is as simple as it seems. Anyway, long term, I ended up seeking counselling, and my mum was so relieved and encouraged that, and was always like, so what did you learn this week, Lois? And we both kept exploring, literature and watching documentaries, and then the apologies came along, and, we took those apologies to mean, I don't feel sorry that I was adopted. There's no shame in that. My mum shouldn't have to apologise for being a great adoptive mum, but we do feel like Rhonda needs an apology from the government for that era, for the way she wasn't, not only not believe, there's certain things I know where Rhonda was severely let down by police that did know what had happened in the family home. And there's quite a few stories about police, doctors, and even a judge in, I won't say what town, but let's say North Queensland, that was also told what had happened, and nothing was done about it. So it was wonderful that my mum and I could go on this journey together and take that apology on Rhonda's behalf. Yeah.
It's like an honouring of her.
Yeah. That's what the apology means to me.
Yeah. It's beautiful. So, unlike me, my adoptive mother is still alive, and as is my biological mother. What has been the impact of losing both your birth mother and your mother?
Yeah. Okay. So, losing Rhonda at such a young age made me realise life doesn't always turn out as you expect. I never expected my adoptive mother to outlive Rhonda. Probably in even one of those moments in my 20s, I remember being quite annoyed when I did the maths and thought, oh, that's not fair. Rhonda's going to know me my whole life. And I always thought, my poor old mother, because she was so much older than most people's mothers, I always kind of felt like, oh, Mum won't have much longer to live. So I was I think, in shock. Rhonda, when she did die, died quite quickly. I mean, it was a cancer journey that only lasted 18 months. So at the time, I just kind of was in shock, and I just ended up almost shutting down completely on the topic of adoption. On the other side, when regards to my adopted mother, I always sort of said I was put on this earth to amuse my mother, but suddenly I became aware that my mother was also here to take me on my adoption journey. And Mum was incredible. We never stopped talking about how lucky we were to have each other. My mother was such good emotional support for me. And, looking back on her passing, I know how I'm really glad I invested the years that I did with my mother. Dragging her to cafes and museums around the city every weekend. I don't know. I appreciate Rhonda's spirit, but I have Mum's resilience as well. I don't know. I'm grateful. My mother died in my 50th year. I mean, she made my 50th birthday. I can't stop saying it. As a little kid that's, suddenly has a 50-year-old when you're in grade 1 as a mother, and then a parent in their 60s in high school, you just never think you're going to be 50 and have your mother here on this earth to support you.
Yeah.
I just didn't imagine in a million years that, that would be the case. I did have a hard time when she died for about 6 months of pretty intense grief. But talking about it has helped. And really, I guess there was so little that was left unsaid between my mother and I. And I mean, my one particular brother and I always joke about who was the favourite, and we're probably the favourites in different ways, but it was so powerful and important to me that I could be there when my adoptive mother passed away.
Yeah.
That's just, it made me not fear death. And I don't know, my mother had such a strong Christian faith that she turned death into a really positive thing, it was just, and for a girl that had said to her that I wasn't so much interested in her family tree, suddenly we were there overlooking South Brisbane, and my mother grew up opposite the Gabba, and it was kind of like, I don't know, it was so fitting that I could be there in an area of Brisbane that was so important to her growing up and feel connected to that, under this full moon and the Gabba's all lit up, and down there somewhere is the remnants of Mum's childhood home.
Yeah.
And that's the night that she goes out from this world.
Yeah.
So, yeah. That's convoluted. I hope that was okay.
That was great. And I could really identify with what you said, because with my adoptive father, he passed away in January, and he was a person in my life who I felt completely safe with, and somebody who really understood me and took the time to try and understand adoption issues and how adoption had impacted me. And there was nothing left unsaid between he and I when he passed. Like he'd really taken the time to understand how I'd been impacted, and we were with him at the end too. And we made sure between my brother and sister and I that there was someone touching him the whole time, and to be there in those last moments, as traumatic as it was, I'm incredibly grateful that we got to do that, and that there was nothing left unsaid between us.
Well, that's beautiful, Jo.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Trying not to.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Go down that road. Yeah. So he and my mother, I have to say, they were never threatened by what I think is a natural curiosity and desire to search from where I came from. And I'd always had, because of their age, a terrible fear of losing my adoptive parents. And so much so that I wouldn't stay anywhere as a child unless my adoptive brother was with me, because he was only 7 years older. And if he was with me, I knew they'd come back. So I was probably 13 before I stayed anywhere without them, and that was at my sister's house in Brisbane. And my dad, he was always really fit and healthy, but I noticed for the first time when I was about 21 and after my eldest brother had taken his own life, that Dad began to age faster.
Yep.
And it was then that I started to really fear his death, and it brought up, I guess, some abandonment issues. And he started to develop a number of health concerns, any one of which could have taken his life, and that fear grew in me. And I can remember he developed a tumour in his pancreas.
Yeah.
And at the time, we didn't know whether it was cancerous or not. And I can remember just like falling down on the ground, and my husband coming in. I'm like, "Go away, don't touch me." I just couldn't, you know. And so it was like 24 hours before I could even mention it again. So it was quite overwhelming at some times. Is that anticipation of an adoptive parent's death something that you can relate to?
Oh, it never stopped.
Yeah.
I think even in primary school, I was so scared my parents would not only just death, but I remember my parents having a fight, as couples want to do, and it was all over the fact that no one helped with the dishes, and my mum having what was probably her only really overly blown dramatic moment when I was growing up, where she packed her bags and said she was going to leave.
Yeah.
And I'm sure lots of people can identify with that. But, you know, I took that literally, and I went into her room and I collapsed and I sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. It's one of the most probably... it's a very probably traumatic memory, and I didn't have many of those growing up, but you know, my mum, I think she must have instantly recognised that I had this absolute fear of abandonment, and she kind of stopped. She collapsed into tears as well.
I must have broken her heart.
Yeah. Unpacked everything.
Yeah.
Hugged me and said she'd never leave me. You know, and she just said she was just feeling sad because no one would do the dishes. You know, it's like, okay. And I think I probably went out in tears, and I was always a bit of a boss in the house and told my dad and brothers they had to start doing the dishes and stop hurting Mum's feelings.
Yeah.
But in regards to Mum's health, she had a double or triple bypass just before I met Rhonda when I was about 21 or 22. I remember my eldest brother told me I had to prepare myself that Mum may not make it. I mean, it's only, okay, so that's 30 years ago or so. But back then, bypasses were a lot more serious than they are today. It was a little bit more fraught with danger. And then the year, and then the year Rhonda died, Mum also spent a few weeks in hospital. Right in the weeks before she died. She was quite sick, and that was another time when I thought, wow, you know, in theory I could have lost Mum and Rhonda like weeks apart from each other. But Mum battled through like she always did, had good doctors, good operations, good outcomes. So I think as an adoptee I had a real fear of being abandoned my whole life, and I'd often say out loud to family, I'm just warning you now, I'm not going to cope when Mum dies. And yet by the time she died, we had gone through so much, and they get into their mid-90s and all you can do is just applaud them and go, well done, you know. We were planning, you know, her 95th, her 96th, her 97th. I said, right, Mum, you know, like you're not allowed to make it, you're not allowed to not make it to 100, and I hope I'm here to help you celebrate, because clearly you're not going anywhere. But, you know, after all the things we'd gone through over the years, it's okay. Like, when she passed away, I was at a point in my life where I think I honestly was prepared. I was prepared for it. But, boy, that only took, oh dear, maybe 47 years for me to be ready for my mum to be able to move on. I miss having her to talk to. That's all right, you know, like I kind of owe it to her to be able to get on with it. And I remember also thinking, oh, Lois, there is no way you will ever be able to speak at your mother's funeral. But, you know, my father had only died 18 months before. And in a strange way, Mum and I said it was one of, like, we had such a... My mother was a social creature. For an introvert, she actually she's probably more extroverted than she realised. But we had such a great day connecting with extended family and friends, and you know, we had great music, great food, great laughter, and I'd given a speech at my dad's funeral, and Mum really loved it. And she said, I hope you give me a good speech like that. And what I wanted to say to her is, oh, Mum, there is no way I'll be able to speak at your funeral. I didn't say that to her. So then Mum, of course, passes away. And then suddenly I had in me a strength I never knew I had. And the first thing I said when I stood up at her funeral was, my mother would be so disappointed in me if I didn't stand up and tell a few jokes and tell a few good stories about her and my relationship. And I surprised myself. I did it. You know, I was so relieved I did. And I honestly would say, even months before, I would think that was the one speech in life I would be incapable of doing.
Yeah. And
yeah, you know, I was good right until the very end. It was a bit hard at the end. That's okay, but I got there. And more than anything, I was like, I could just feel Mum's... My mum was, like all mums, they're proud of their kids. And I just felt like I really felt Mum's presence and like, yay, Lois, good on you. Thanks for saying those things.
Yeah.
Even the things you probably said that embarrassed me. But yeah, you know, and that, yeah, was important.
Yeah. Lois, my eldest brother was 36 when he took his life, and I was 21 at the time.
Yeah.
My eldest sister is 18 years older than me, and my closest brother, which is the only one that I remember growing up with, was 7 years older. I had some negative experiences with extended family when he died, and felt in some ways that I was excluded from them after the loss. One experience had a particularly lingering impact on me. So my brother hung himself at his home in central Queensland while he was working for the mines, and the mining company said they would pay for 4 of us to go up there and help pack up his family and bring them and his body home back to Brisbane. So my sister had 4 young children, including 1-year-old twins at the time. I think they were 1. So it was agreed that my parents, my brother and I would be the ones to go up. When we returned, a family member who'd already implied to me when I was a teen that I should be grateful to my parents for even having me, said to my sister in front of me that it should have been her who went and not me. And that would have left me, age 21, at home alone after losing my brother to suicide, which I felt was a really cruel thing to say at the time.
That's so much trauma, Jo. So much trauma that you went through, and so much trauma. And everyone deals with grief and trauma in a different way, but there's an awful lot of people putting their issues on you, and it's hard as an adoptee to reconcile why they're doing that.
That's exactly it. And at the time, all I was interpreting it to mean, whether it was how it was meant or not, was that I was not as close a family member to my brother as what my sister was, or other family members. So it brought up a lot of adoption issues for me at the time, which was not helpful. And even though I knew my parents and my siblings didn't feel that way, I had to say at the time it broke my heart. It was it's something that's lingered on with me over the years, and in the years leading up to my father's passing, like, we knew it was coming. Like, he had some issues with his heart, and in the end, he was 91 when he passed, but we knew it was coming. So based on those experiences, I had a lot of anxiety coming up to his passing, and I thought at first it was just about feeling of abandonment. But I realise now that also maybe some of it was that it might again bring up issues where I feel separated off, because I think for me one of the biggest issues was I always wondered whether people thought I was a part of the same, as much a part of the family as what I felt part of them, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And when those things come up, it makes me realise actually some of them don't think I'm as close. Yeah. Yeah. So what surprised me though when Dad passed was that those issues didn't come up, and I don't know whether it was because some of those relatives have now passed, or
Maybe
because
old generations. And...
yeah, it might be, and also because my father was very private about how he wanted to be farewell, so we didn't have a funeral, so there wasn't a lot of extended family there. It was just very people who were very close to us who were there. So I guess no one said anything that triggered me. And
that's a good thing.
It is a good thing, yeah. And it allowed me to just be a daughter who was grieving the loss of her father and yearning for more time with him.
Which is essentially how we probably all connect with others on this earth, right? It's just hard to know as an adoptee if what you're feeling is authentic to what someone else who's not feeling. But yeah, I think grief is grief. Yeah. I don't know when you... Because, I mean, I do recognise that adoptees, non-adoptees, we all have people in our lives that we absolutely love, that, you know, a biological connection sometimes means something, but sometimes it doesn't as well. Yeah, Jo, I kind of felt a little overwhelmed when, you know, when I think about the trauma you went through when your brother committed suicide, and I just, as adoptees, we were treading such unknown ground, and you throw in this kind of trauma. Did you consider getting counselling, or did you get any kind of counselling? Like, what support did you have when your brother passed away?
So the man who's now my husband, he and I had only just got back together after breaking up for a year around the time that my brother passed away. And I don't think anybody in the world knows that at the time I did, so I was just a poor uni student at the time. So it was really expensive to go and seek help back then. There was certainly no government support for that kind of thing. And I reached out to a psychiatrist in Brisbane City, and I went to her, and she had absolutely no understanding of adoption issues at all. And
oh gosh,
yeah, and I kind of felt at the time that the kind of people, I just kind of felt like I wasn't the kind of person she would normally see, and I almost felt like I was whinging about something that wasn't worth whinging about. And so I only went and saw it once, because it was just, and it put me off of going to see anybody for a really long time. So and I've had other experiences sort of post then where I've gone to see people who didn't really understand adoption issues either. And I mean, it's more harmful than good if you go and see someone, a practitioner, who doesn't know anything about adoption. So so it was only really when I started seeing practitioners who do know, have been educated about adoption issues and support groups and things like that, that people started to understand what I was talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So right on the money there. When I found out the traumas of my birth mother, what she'd gone through, I got sent to a psychologist that had no clue and gave me a brochure about being happy, and and was kind of quite fascinated by, I don't know, it's too horrendous to actually speak about, only because I've dealt with it, because I did find the right person, and it's actually one of the counsellors here at Jigsaw. So I can't stress enough to anybody that might be going through an adoption or like a related issue in this field to really seek out someone that understands. I wouldn't be where I am today without the right sort of counselling that got me through this.
Yeah, and don't let it put you off if you come across someone who doesn't understand.
Go find another one.
Go find someone else, yeah. It's really important.
Which is what, I mean, when I saw this really poor psychologist, I had a friend that's a social worker, and straight away was like, oh, Lois, please, just keep looking, you know. And I got on the internet and I looked up post-adoption services and children's services in Queensland. That led me to the Benevolent Society and to Jigsaw. There's such good help out there. Don't try and do this yourself. There isn't enough written that you won't be able to necessarily just jump on the internet and find all your answers. You've got to process it face to face, or, you know, over Skype or whatnot. We're living in COVID times, it's good. But you need to have someone that can look you in the eye and understand what you're going through. I'm really sorry you went through all that, Jo. That's just horrendous.
And I feel the same
for
you, Lois. And I think one of the things that it can be very empowering when you take control of this situation. You do seek help and you go, and like, you know, I've written stories about it. I've searched and reunited with people. I've seen different counsellors. I've gone to support groups. It's no one-stop shop. Like, it's an ongoing thing that I will continue to, you know, do those things and find my own voice. And taking control of your own healing is very empowering and very healing in itself, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I spoke at my father's funeral as well. And for me, it was just a matter of, he was someone who was always very quiet and didn't like the limelight. And I thought, you're having the limelight today. And it was a long eulogy and I didn't even care. I thought, you can fall asleep if you want.
Good job.
I'm saying everything I want to say, so get stuff.
That's great. Yeah. Wasn't it funny? My adoptive father, I mention him so rarely, and I don't mean not to. My adoptive dad was like a big teddy bear.
Yeah.
At his funeral, I called him Humphrey B. Bear. You know, he was the strong, silent type.
Yeah.
He listened a lot. He was a really, really good listener.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I identify with that. When it came to adoption, I never questioned my dad's love for me. Again, he really was a protector that didn't have to say words, you know, like, so, yeah, whereas my mother was much more verbal, yeah, whilst not necessarily being, as I said, overly extroverted, but extroverted amongst people that she knew and friends and whatnot. Yeah, and I think for me, I also appreciate when I recognise that my biological mother, Rhonda, didn't have that same safety that I had.
Yeah.
So when I think about her father as this horrendous human being, and then I think about, and funny enough, Rhonda's dad and my dad are the same age. And my dad didn't have an easy life either. He had a mother that wasn't particularly nurturing, and he went on to be a teacher in an era where things like the cuts and the cane and slapping kids with rulers was quite common. But that was not my dad. He just did not do that at all in that era, didn't believe in it at all. And I don't remember my father ever raising a hand on me growing up. He couldn't have been a safer, kinder human being. If my dad was frustrated or annoyed at me, well, I'm going to say probably more so, if I did something that made my mother angry, she would tell my father to deal with it, and he'd wait until mum had disappeared, and then he'd just tap me lightly on the arm and kind of giggle and be like, don't do that again. Like, he didn't have it in him to do anything other than, I think he saw me as this kind of tiny little thing that just needed to be protected. And, you know, that's not to say that my mum didn't have reason to she was being a normal person, you know, like, it's okay to be mad at your child and kind of send them to their room or whatnot. But my dad was like, oh, that was all a bit too confronting for him. And it's interesting because even in my dad's later years, as he was a music teacher, he used to volunteer and play for palliative care groups and for limited hours childcare groups. And I remember taking Dad into hospital and having a mum and a son who was about 8 or 9 walk past, and I heard this boy turn to his mother and say, oh, that's Mr. Music. You know, so as this persona my father had as Mr. Music was this quiet, smiling old fellow that sat at the piano. But he was so good with little kids, and he didn't have to say anything. That's why I kind of draw that example of being a lot like Humphrey B. Bear. Yeah. All the qualities that make Humphrey such a great thing for children. Like, you know, that caring, nurturing, fun kind of figure.
He sounds beautiful.
I put myself, I don't know about you, Jo, I put myself fully in charge of my parents' funerals. And I think as adoptees, we're probably prone to wanting to make sure, as you said, the send-off they deserve, not being scared, as you said, to Go as long as you like on the eulogy. Why not? Who's going to stop you? You know, there's something that meant a lot to me at my mother's funeral. I looked over and saw a row of my when I say my biological relatives, I mean the ones that have been with me through this journey, like my biological aunt, cousin, their partners. And it was so wonderful to see them sitting at that funeral as my little kind of cheer squad. And also to know how pleased my mother would be. And that's the word my mother would choose. I'm pleased that they attended, Lois. You know, It's like, it was just so beautiful. And then afterwards, just people at that church service being moved about the adoption aspect of my eulogy, which I didn't shy away from. I said my mother was equally a good mother as she was adoptive mother. And just seeing extended family, friends, or people I didn't even know, talking to some of my biological relatives as well. It was really quite powerful to see how it can work. And it can be supportive, and it's not a competition. Like, I guess the bigger picture for me is knowing that I could love my mother, my father, my birth mother. I could love them all equally. And just as equally, I can be frustrated with people on all sides as well. Yeah. You know, and last year on the lead up to Mother's Day, Mum had been gone a couple of months, and I was still deep in grief. I was feeling sad. I was feeling overwhelmed. And I woke up on Mother's Day with an absolute feeling of getting a shout out from heaven. And Mum and Rhonda just going, oh, Lois, for crying out loud, just get on with it. We're fine. You can do this. Yeah. And it did help. You know, it's sometimes, I don't know, look, am I religious? Yeah, I guess I am religious. I'm really grateful for the foundations probably that Mum gave me, of just feeling like there's a purpose, and that her and Rhonda are both up there looking out for me. I have got with me, Jo, some correspondence. When I first met my birth mother, it was in that era in the 90s where there was no email or whatever. Everything was done. Like, I wrote letters to Rhonda for 6 months before I met her. Yeah. She was living in Melbourne at the time. But equally, my mum and Rhonda, they wrote letters to each other before they met as well. So I'm just going to read you a couple of excerpts, not the whole thing, because my mother wrote a mean letter. It's 6 pages long, so I'll just read you a couple of lines. And here we go. Just bear with me for a minute.
A real letter. I don't even remember the last time I saw one.
You can witness it, Jo, right?
That is a real letter.
Beautiful handwriting, nice penmanship.
I'm glad you're reading it. It's tiny. I wouldn't be able to see it, I don't think.
Yeah. This is the 3rd of November, 1991. Wow. And she's, and these letters came to me. Basically,
I just have to say to you, that's probably when I met my mother as well, right around then. So we must have been in the throes of all of this at exactly the same time.
The legislation, I remember, kicked in the winter. Yeah. It was May or June. Yeah. And the department were overwhelmed.
They would have been.
By everybody just writing and asking for information.
Yeah. I wish I'd known you at the time.
Yeah. That's all right. We know each other now. So Mum writes, Dear Rhonda, it's lovely to know that Lois has had contact with you. We rejoice with her that she is discovering who she is, where she came from, and especially from the photos, recognition of being like someone else. She goes on to talk about, in detail, all the fun stuff about picking me up from the hospital, and it's quite funny along the way, some of her comments. Towards the end, she goes on to say, let me find it, page 6, this was what I thought was really powerful, something that my mother always emphasised to me. She writes, I often thought of you giving up Lois and prayed that God would help you to accept the situation that you were going through. And Mum sometimes told me that verbally as well, that when she first when she first brought me home and I was a tiny little baby, that sometimes she would cry just knowing that somewhere out there was a teenage girl that had to give up her baby.
Yeah.
And that really, that
she could really see it from that
saddened
perspective.
her.
Yeah.
And then she says, we felt it was Lois's right to know her background. We are so happy that you are willing to know her. We also look forward to the day when we can hug you and express to you our thanks for Lois. And then I've got this card that Rhonda wrote back to my mother in relation to that. Witnessing it, Jo?
That's a real card with real writing.
Card. It says, thank you. Words can say so little when someone's done so much.
Wow.
And Rhonda writes back, thank you for the most beautiful letter I have ever received. I did shed a tear, but it was not out of sadness. I believe there is a reason for everything. And your choosing of Lois and your wonderful letter of her life to me, I feel is already building in me a stronger faith. Now remember, Rhonda sort of had a religious upbringing as well, but clearly not in the sense that, the horrors of the world are taking place in her household. Mm-hmm. So giving me up is a safety thing. Mm-hmm. But her faith is coming through, I think, as a direct result of seeing my parents' faith acting out in such a compassionate way. Mm-hmm. So she goes on to say, I have an elderly couple in their 80s now who have helped me over the years and been wonderful friends. When I told them of Lois and her family, they said, as they have always said, God is good, Rhonda. I am going to write you a letter soon, but I feel a little overwhelmed lately. Of course, changing jobs and friends staying and finding Lois has all been overwhelming. I need some quiet mental time. I am so proud of her achievements, and I also look forward to the day when I can hug you back and hold you and say thank you, God. Oh, here I go. Oh. Anyway, that's pretty powerful stuff. I'm so lucky to have that information,
beautiful.
And that correspondence, and that they both held on to it, and that both of those bits of correspondence have found their way back to me after their passings.
So you only saw these after your mum passed?
I remember my mum writing that letter to Rhonda, because at the time I wanted to proofread it, because I was 23 and a control freak and didn't want Mum to say the wrong things to my Beth mother. Yeah. So but I hadn't seen this version until my biological grandmother returned it to me only in recent years. Because my biological grandmother is still alive. Yeah. And then this card that Mum got from Rhonda, Mum always kept that in her correspondence. I read it at the time that Mum received it, but I hadn't read it I hadn't read it in the interim. But as was wont and typical of my mother, she made sure that card stayed where I would find it again, and so no, I hadn't seen it in many years until I saw it after her death last year, and I was like, wow, I could put these letters together. I mean, it's for such an unusual thing. Being adopted is not normal, right? I think we all agree, but it happens, and in my case it worked out for my benefit. It saved me from a very dangerous situation, and to be able to have this correspondence as a record of the love of two mothers, that means everything to me. So I'm a product of two good mothers. I've always said it. And a quiet, lovely Humphrey P. Bear dad.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And that's probably a really beautiful note to end this discussion on, I think. So I'd like to thank you very much for speaking to me today. I know it isn't easy, especially when the losses are so fresh. But your story is something that I know a lot of people relate to. Yeah. So thank you so much, Jo. Lois. And I'll say goodbye to now for Lois, and just say that next episode, Jane Sleeker and I will talk more about the various forms of grief and loss that we may encounter in life, and how the adoption experience adds an extra layer of complexity when tackling these experiences. So be sure to check our podcast notes for links to the relevant information over the next 2 podcasts. Thanks for listening to the Adopt Perspective podcast. If you'd like to find out more, go to the podcast page on www.jigsawqueensland.com. jigsaw.com, and you'll find a wealth of information and resources on the website. If you reside in Queensland, you can reach Jigsaw Queensland's Forced Adoption Support Service on toll-free 1800 210313, or you can call Jigsaw on 07 33 58 6666. If you live in another state of Australia, you can still call the Forced Adoption Support Service number, and your call will be answered by the Forced Adoption Support Service in the state that you are calling from. In every other state, Relationships Australia operates this service. A big thank you to Matt Sparrow for composing and recording our original theme music. Until next time, I'm Jo Sparrow saying farewell from Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption.